I was thrown out of my house by my husband and his mistress on Christmas Eve. 1 hour later, 19 black BMWs surrounded me. The heavy oak doors of my husband's and my Hillsborough mansion didn't just close behind me on Christmas Eve. They slammed shut so hard, I felt my chest vibrate like I'd been hit. My husband, Graham Whitmore, tossed my worn-out Louis Vuitton handbag onto the freezing marble steps with the same indifference someone would have throwing out trash, and the sound of expensive leather hitting stone echoed through the quiet, gated neighborhood like a judge's gavel sealing my fate. My husband's mistress, Madison, stood perfectly framed in the golden light spilling from the foyer, the warmth of the house glowing around her like a halo she absolutely didn't deserve. She crossed her arms over her designer cashmere sweater and grinned at me with the kind of satisfaction you only see in someone who's waited their whole life to witness your downfall. Her smile was all sharp teeth, no warmth, sweet as antifreeze, but just as deadly. "Let's see how you survive now, Charlotte," she smirked, her voice dripping with mockery. "No more trust fund, no more connections, no more of Graham's credit cards. Good luck out there." The door slammed shut before I could respond, before I could say anything. The mechanical click of the lock sliding into place sounded like a gunshot, cutting me off completely from the only life I had ever known. I stood there on the marble steps, completely frozen in shock and disbelief. I was 32 years old, and in less than an hour, I had lost everything. My job at my husband's family advertising firm, the city condo I had put all my savings into, the car I bought, but he registered under his name, and now my family itself. The Bay Area's signature winter fog was rolling in thick and gray, swirling around my ankles like smoke from a crematorium. I had no money in my bank account. My husband had locked me out. I had no car. I had nothing but the suitcase at my feet and the charcoal cashmere coat that was the only thing keeping me from freezing. My crime, according to my husband during his 15-minute speech, was refusing his open marriage. Even though I was the one who discovered his affair, I was the one trying to hold on, trying to pull his heart back toward our family. When I finally gathered enough courage to have an honest conversation, I thought the worst-case scenario was that we would split peacefully, like adults. But instead, my husband had planned this ahead of time, to push me out and take everything from me. "Get out if you won't accept it," Graham said coldly, standing in his study with a glass of scotch in his hand, while his mistress Madison sat quietly on the leather sofa, avoiding my eyes. Like a meek, obedient girl, he added, "You're always difficult, always controlling, never satisfied with what I've given you. You have 1 hour to pack your essentials and leave." I stood there, stunned into silence. Now, as I dragged my suitcase down the long, winding road, its wheels rattling loudly across the spotless stone pavers, I felt like I was walking through someone else's nightmare. Every window in the neighborhood glowed with warm holiday light. The twinkle of Christmas trees, ornate decorations, silhouettes of families gathered together on Christmas Eve. I could almost hear the laughter, the clinking glasses, the crackling fireplaces, the excited shouts of children. I was like a ghost haunting a paradise I grew up in, but somehow never truly belonged to. I collapsed onto a snow-covered bench just inside the gated entrance, my whole body shaking so violently my teeth clattered like dice in a cup. The cold didn't just bite at my skin. It sank all the way into my bones, into my soul. The temperature was dropping quickly as night fell, and I was terrified to realize I had nowhere to go, no one to call, no plan for what came next. That's when I saw him. He appeared out of the rolling fog like a ghost, moving slowly and unsteadily. A man, completely barefoot on the frozen pavement, his exposed skin turning a frightening shade of purple in the icy air. His curly hair whipped wildly around his face in the bitter wind, tangled over features carved with exhaustion and pain. He was wearing nothing but a thin, torn hospital gown, barely covering his frail body, the kind patients wear in emergency rooms. He looked as if the cold had already claimed him, as if he was only seconds away from collapsing into the snow and never rising again. He stopped right in front of my bench, his steps wobbling dangerously, and I saw his eyes, unfocused, desperate, but they were beautiful. Very beautiful. He looked at me, but seemed to be seeing through me, seeing or remembering someone else. Something in me, a kind of instinct I didn't know I had, overpowered every logical thought about protecting myself. Without thinking about consequences, without calculating the cost, I stood up from the bench. All I knew was that I still had one sweater, that if I walked fast enough, I would survive. But he wouldn't. He needed something warm right now. My fingers, numb from the cold, fumbled with the buttons of my coat. The moment I opened it, the wind slammed into me like a physical blow, knocking the breath out of my lungs and making me gasp. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I stepped forward and draped the heavy charcoal cashmere coat, the last valuable thing I owned, the only thing protecting me from hypothermia, over his trembling shoulders. I carefully fastened each button, my frozen fingers barely able to manage it. He suddenly grabbed my hand, his grip unexpectedly strong, his skin ice-cold against mine, but the force in his fingers was almost painful. He looked straight into my eyes, and for just a moment the darkness vanished completely. His gaze turned sharp, deep, incredibly intelligent, and I felt like he was seeing straight into my soul. "Kindness like yours," he whispered, his voice hoarse and cracked from the cold wind, "is rarer than diamonds, rarer than anything money can buy." Then, just as abruptly as he had appeared, he turned and walked away, disappearing as if he had never existed at all. I sat back down on the bench, now wearing only a thin sweater and knit pants that barely protected me from the weather. I wrapped my arms around myself, pulling my knees to my chest. I truly thought I might not make it through the night, and a part of me, the part that had just been betrayed, humiliated, and cast aside, wanted to let everything go, just wanted the cold to seep in and freeze every thought, every pain. Exactly 1 hour later, the peaceful stillness of the winter night was shattered by a sound that seemed impossible. 19 black luxury sedans, sleek, expensive cars that looked like they belonged to diplomats or heads of state, rolled down the street in a perfect formation, silent, their headlights slicing through the fog like lasers. They moved with such precision, it looked like something straight out of a movie. The cars formed a perfect circle around my bench, blocking the entire street, and I realized I was surrounded. The car in the center, a Rolls-Royce Phantom probably worth more than most houses, had its door opened by a uniformed driver. A man stepped onto the sidewalk, and my brain simply couldn't process what I was seeing. It was still him, still that man, still that face, still that curly hair, still those sharp eyes. But everything else had completely changed. The torn hospital gown and the desperate, impoverished look were gone. Now he wore a full-length camel haircoat, the kind that radiated Italian craftsmanship and old-money elegance, fitting his frame perfectly. His hair was no longer wild and windblown, but neatly styled, polished enough to be in vogue. Massive diamonds, real ones, flawless and clearly worth a fortune, glittered on his fingers and coat buttons, catching the streetlights. He walked with the confidence and authority of someone who had never once doubted his place in the world. He came straight toward me, his expensive leather shoes tapping rhythmically against the pavement, the sound almost musical. He no longer looked like a patient, no longer weak, fragile, or close to death. He looked like a king, like a man who could buy and sell an entire company with a flick of his hand. He stopped exactly 2 steps from my bench, looked down at me with a smile that could level a city, and said just one sentence that would change the entire trajectory of my life. "I've watched you long enough, Charlotte Whitmore, to know exactly who you really are." My mind was fighting to keep up, trying to understand what was happening. The cold, the shock, the surreal nature of the entire evening. It was too much. "Who are you?" I stammered through numb lips, my voice barely more than a whisper. "My name is Nathan Harris," he said, as if that simple sentence explained everything. And in the Bay Area, among people who cared about such things, it did explain everything. The name Harris was carved onto hospital wings, museum galleries, university buildings, and owned half of San Francisco's commercial real estate. Nathan Harris was the widower of shipping magnate Thomas Harris, a young man famous for being reclusive, avoiding the public, rarely seen despite being one of the richest people in California. He was almost a legend, a story wealthy people told at cocktail parties. "Get in the car," he commanded, gesturing toward the open Rolls-Royce door with a diamond-lit hand. I should have been suspicious. I should have asked more questions, demanded explanations, protected myself. But I was freezing, completely alone in the world, and this man, whoever he really was, he was the only person who had reached out to me tonight, the only warmth standing between me and dying on a park bench on Christmas Eve. I stood on trembling legs and walked toward the car. The moment I stepped inside, I was wrapped in a warmth so deep it almost hurt. The interior smelled faintly of leather and expensive jasmine, the heat from the climate system enveloping me like a blanket. Nathan settled gently into the seat beside me, and the door closed with the solid, expensive sound of German engineering. He watched me intently, like a jeweler examining the flaws of a rare gemstone, his intelligent eyes missing nothing. Not my frozen fingers, not my chattering teeth, not the mixture of fear and desperate hope that must have been written all over my face. "Why?" I asked when I finally managed to speak. "What was that in the park? The bare feet, the hospital gown, the—" "Every Christmas Eve," Nathan interrupted, pouring tea from a silver thermos into delicate porcelain cups. "I run a test. I own several $billion, Charlotte. Anyone who approaches me in my daily life wants something: a grant, a loan, an investment, a photo op, access to my network. They only see the Harris name and the enormous wealth, not the human being beneath it. They see the mansions, the luxury cars, and completely miss the man who owns them." He handed me a cup of tea, and I wrapped my freezing hands around it with gratitude, feeling the warmth soak into my fingers. So, once a year, I strip all of it away. I become invisible by becoming exactly what society teaches people not to look at: a homeless man, someone at the very bottom. I walk through the richest neighborhoods in America to see who will stop, who will see past what's obvious, who will recognize a suffering human being and choose to help even when there's nothing to gain from it. He took a sip of tea, his face tightening with an old pain. "I've done this test for 5 consecutive years, Charlotte. 5 years walking through neighborhoods where the median home price is over $10 million. Do you know how many people have stopped to help me before tonight?" I shook my head, though I was already beginning to guess the answer. "None," he said softly, letting that single word hang between us. "Not one person in 5 years. People stepped over me like I was trash on the sidewalk. They called security to remove me. One man even kicked snow at me so I'd get out of his way. Another woman took a picture of me on her phone, laughing with her friends about the crazy homeless guy. I've watched humanity fail this test over and over again." He leaned forward, setting his teacup onto the small table that folded out from inside the car. "But you, Charlotte Whitmore, you had just lost everything. I watched your husband throw you out of that house. I saw his mistress laugh at your pain. You were terrified, freezing, clearly in shock, facing homelessness yourself. You had every reason to ignore me, to focus only on your own survival." "You were watching the entire time?" I asked, feeling a chill crawl down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. "My security team is always nearby," he reassured me, gesturing vaguely toward the other cars surrounding us. "I'm eccentric, Charlotte. But what matters is, you gave me the only thing that was left. You saw a human being in agony, and you acted without hesitation, without calculation. That told me everything I needed to know about your character." The car began to move as we talked, gliding smoothly through the dark streets. We passed through gates that opened automatically, and I held my breath when we approached an estate that made my husband's mansion look like a cheap rental. The Tudor-style home seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions, lit by soft landscape lighting, looking like something out of a fairy tale. "I have no wife, no children," Nathan continued, as the car stopped at the main entrance. "No direct heir. I built the Harris Foundation, but I need someone to run it and inherit it when I die. I don't want my legacy shaped by some MBA who only cares about tax write-offs and performance metrics, or someone who thinks poverty is a problem to be solved with a spreadsheet. I want someone who knows what it feels like to stand on the outside looking in, someone who understands vulnerability because they've lived it. I want someone whose heart hasn't been hardened by privilege." The door opened, a formally dressed butler waiting with an umbrella despite the fact that it wasn't raining. Nathan stepped out, then turned back to me, waiting for my answer, and I noticed he was still holding my charcoal cashmere coat with a kind of reverence. "I'm offering you a position, Charlotte, a job running my foundation, and a home, if you agree. But let's be clear about what I'm offering. This isn't charity. This isn't me rescuing a damsel in distress. I'm offering you a long war. The work has many enemies. Developers hate our affordable housing initiatives. Politicians don't want to be held accountable. Corporations despise our labor rights advocacy. If you take this on, your life won't become easier. It will become harder, but it will matter." He held out his hand to me, and I saw that even covered in diamonds, wearing expensive clothes, and carrying unimaginable wealth, his hands still bore the marks of labor. These were not the soft, pampered hands of a wealthy heir like Graham. "Do you want to stand beside me?" he asked. I looked down at my trembling hands, still wrapped around the teacup, then back at the open car door. Behind me was the street where my husband had abandoned me, the darkness of rejection and betrayal. Ahead of me was a man who had tested my soul in the cruelest way possible and somehow found it worthy. "Yes," I whispered, my voice stronger than I expected. "Yes, I accept." Nathan's smile broke wide, transforming his entire face. "Excellent. Because tomorrow morning at 6, we begin taking this city back. Rest, Charlotte. You're going to need it." The next 5 years were anything but a fairy tale. They were more like a brutal training camp designed to turn me into someone I never imagined I could become. Nathan hadn't been joking about war. The Harris Foundation wasn't just a charity that wrote checks and hosted galas. It was a precision-built machine designed to dismantle poverty in the Bay Area, and Nathan ran it with the strategic exactness of a 4-star general commanding troops on a battlefield. I moved into the east wing of the estate, into rooms more spacious and beautiful than anywhere I had ever lived. But I barely saw them because my days started at 5 in the morning, with Nathan standing at the foot of my bed, already dressed, holding a cup of coffee and a stack of files I was expected to get through before breakfast. He taught me everything, and he was a strict teacher, accepting nothing less than excellence. He taught me how to read balance sheets until the numbers revealed themselves, how to spot someone lying in a board meeting within the first 30 seconds, how to leverage the foundation's assets to force the city council to change zoning laws for affordable housing. He taught me how to negotiate with real estate developers who saw the poor as barriers to profit, how to shame politicians into action by exposing their hypocrisy in ways they couldn't ignore, how to build coalitions between groups that had been fighting each other for decades. "Kindness without power is just a wish," he told me one afternoon, slamming a thick stack of briefing papers onto my desk so hard I jumped. "It's a pretty sentiment that changes nothing. If you want to truly change the world, Charlotte, you must be willing to break things. You must be willing to make people uncomfortable, to disrupt systems that profit from inequality, to be called terrible names by terrible people. Compassion without a willingness to fight is just cowardice." I had worked harder than I ever had at the advertising firm, where my main job had been helping wealthy people use fancy words to deceive buyers. For the past 5 years, I wasn't just Nathan's assistant. I was his lover, his student, his apprentice. I absorbed his intelligence, his strategic thinking, and his absolute ruthlessness when it came to protecting the vulnerable. I learned that gentleness and ferocity aren't opposites. They are two sides of the same commitment to justice. Meanwhile, Graham remained silent. He called me exactly once, about 3 weeks after I was thrown out, to remind me about finalizing the divorce. He didn't ask where I was living or whether I was okay after being kicked out into the snow that night. We finalized the divorce. I blocked his number after that last meeting, and I never looked back. Madison sent me a few social media messages over the years, usually when she received something, an estate or a car that I knew damn well was still under Graham's name. I ignored everyone. To me, Graham and his mistress died on Christmas Eve, and I made my choice when I stepped off that bench and into Nathan's car. Then came a Tuesday morning in October, 5 years after that transformative Christmas Eve, the day everything I had learned and everything I had become would be tested. I was in my corner office on the 40th floor of the Salesforce Tower, where the Harris Foundation had moved its headquarters 2 years earlier. From up there, the view of the bay was breathtaking, but I hardly noticed it anymore. I was deep in concentration, reviewing architectural plans for the Second Home Project, a revolutionary housing initiative we were about to break ground on. The project would provide 200 units of long-term supportive housing, with on-site medical care, job training, and childcare. It was the result of 3 years of planning, fundraising, and political advocacy, and it was going to change countless lives. My assistant Reese buzzed through the intercom. "Ms. Whitmore, you have visitors at reception. They don't have an appointment." I didn't lift my eyes from the blueprints, my mind still calculating costs and timelines. "Who is it, Reese? I'm very busy today." A brief silence, and I heard hesitation in Reese's voice. "He says he's your husband, ma'am." My pen froze on the page. I felt my entire body halt. 5 years, not one birthday card, not one message, not one genuine attempt at communication. And now he was standing at my door? I turned my chair to face the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the bay stretching toward the horizon. I was no longer the frightened girl on a park bench. I was the executive director of a multi-billion-dollar foundation. I was the woman Nathan Harris had chosen. I had power now, real power, the kind that changes laws, builds towers, and reshapes communities. "Send them up," I said calmly. When the office door opened, Graham walked in, and behind him was a woman I barely recognized as Madison. The confident, glowing girl from that Christmas Eve 5 years ago was entirely gone. In her place was a woman trying desperately to hold herself together and failing miserably. Her designer dress was at least 2 seasons old and no longer fit properly. Her makeup was too heavy, clearly an attempt to hide exhaustion and stress. But it was her eyes that told the real story. There was a desperation in them no amount of makeup could conceal. Graham looked even worse. The confident, arrogant man I once lived with had vanished. Graham had gained a noticeable amount of weight, his forehead dotted with sweat, his suit cheap and ill-fitting. "Charlotte!" Graham exclaimed, overly excited, rushing forward with his arms spread as if he intended to hug me. "My God, look at you! Look at this office, this view!" I did not stand. I did not smile. I did not move. I simply watched him with the analytical gaze Nathan had taught me to use in negotiations. His momentum faltered when he realized I was not going to meet him halfway. The hug evaporated in midair, and he stopped about a step away from my desk, his arms slowly dropping to his sides. "Sit," I said, pointing to the 2 uncomfortable chairs on the opposite side of my desk, the ones I reserved for difficult meetings with people I had no desire to spend time with. They sat. Madison still didn't look at me. Graham tried to maintain a smile, but it was already beginning to warp at the edges. "Why do you want to see me?" I asked, setting my pen down with deliberate precision. "I just wanted to see you," Graham said, using that familiar tone he always used whenever he had done something wrong and wanted to smooth things over with me. "It's been so long. I've been waiting for you to come back. I've been following all the news about your success." "Stop it, Graham," I cut in, my voice calm but sharp as a scalpel. You came here, bringing your mistress with you. Yes. For 5 years, Madison had still been publicly understood as his girlfriend. You came because you need something. Whatever feeling existed ended the moment you threw me out of the house 5 years ago. So let's skip the performance and get to the real reason. What do you want? Graham cleared his throat and finally lifted his head. I'm having a bit of financial trouble, Charlotte. My startup ran into some unexpected challenges. The market shifted. I know you have a fund. Not doing well? I raised an eyebrow, leaning back, cutting him off. I read the financial news very closely, Graham. That company. You poured everything into it, didn't you? The house, the business assets, the trust fund. All of it. Graham visibly flinched. How did you know? So you're bankrupt, I said, not as a question, but as an obvious fact. The bank is repossessing the mansion. You're facing criminal charges for defrauding investors in a Ponzi-style scheme. The two of you are living in some motel, burning through the last of your credit cards. That's the summary, isn't it? No one answered, which was answer enough. So why are you here? I asked, even though I already knew. I need a loan, Graham blurted, then paused as if realizing he'd said too much, but still continued. Just 2 million, maybe 3 to be safe. I can pay you back, Charlotte, I swear. With interest. Whatever terms you want. I let the request hang in the air for a long moment, studying them both. Then I leaned forward, placing my hands on the desk. Let me see if I understand this correctly, I said slowly. You want me to take $2 or $3 million from a foundation that feeds hungry children, helps homeless families, and provides medical care for people who can't afford it, and give that money to you so you can keep your mansion and start another business venture. We used to be a family, Graham shouted, jumping to his feet. Madison was just a mistake. I always loved you. I brought her here today. I stood too, slowly and deliberately, and I watched them both recoil from the tension in my face. Used to be a family? I repeated softly. Yes, we used to be. Before you betrayed me. Before you brought her into my home on Christmas Eve. When I was freezing to death outside, you two were sleeping in my bed. Charlotte, please, Graham begged, his voice cracking with desperation. I have nowhere else to go. No one else will help me, only you. You will not receive a single dollar from me or this foundation, I said, my voice ice cold. Graham's face twisted in anger. He pulled out his phone and held it up. I have all our intimate videos. I'll release them everywhere. Let's see how the world reacts. Let's see how your precious Nathan Harris reacts when he finds out what his perfect CEO is like in bed. Your empire will crumble. I pressed the intercom button. Reese, please send security to my office immediately. You're insane! Graham screamed as 2 security guards appeared at the door. You think you'll be happy? You think he'll still want you when your reputation is destroyed? No, I said calmly as the guards began escorting him out. I've just learned the value of my own self-worth, and my value doesn't depend on standing next to a man to be recognized. The door shut behind them, cutting Graham off mid-sentence. A sudden silence fell over the room. I returned to my desk and sat down, my hands slightly shaking from the adrenaline. My phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Nathan, who was on a business trip in the Hamptons, but was still keeping a close eye on everything. The message was simple. Turn on the news, it's about to begin. Not a single unnecessary word of comfort. Every bit of his care and protection always came through action. I picked up the remote and turned on the TV mounted on the office wall. Breaking news scrolled across the bottom of the screen. The collapse of Graham's company had triggered a federal investigation, and prosecutors were announcing indictments against several key architects of the scam, people who had intentionally recruited new victims to keep the fraud alive. Among those charged was Graham Whitmore. He wasn't just bankrupt. He was about to go to prison. I leaned back in my chair, the remote slipping from my hand, and for the first time in 5 years, I felt something that wasn't anger, hurt, or determination. I felt a strange sense of calm, like a final puzzle piece had finally clicked into place. My phone rang. It was Nathan. "Are you okay?" he asked without any preamble. "I don't know," I admitted. "I think so. Am I too harsh for having compassion for a man who was homeless, but not an ounce of that compassion for him?" "Not harsh at all," Nathan said firmly. "He made choices. He hurt people, vulnerable people. He betrayed you first and worst. You owe him nothing, Charlotte. Not your empathy, not anything." "I miss you," I said. "I miss you too," Nathan replied, still the same as always, and I could picture his shy smile. "I'll be home this weekend." After hanging up, I turned my chair back toward the window, watching the fog roll into the bay. Somewhere out there, my ex-husband and his mistress were falling apart, facing the consequences. And I was here, in this office, doing work that mattered. I picked up the architectural plans for the second home project and returned to work. There were families waiting for housing, children needing stability, lives that could change if we got this right. November arrived with relentless gray rain, washing the streets clean while the city's scandals spilled across headlines and courtrooms. Graham was under house arrest awaiting trial, his legal fees devouring whatever assets prosecutors hadn't already frozen. Madison seemed to be living in a budget motel in Daly City, her credit cards maxed out, and no options left. Madison showed up at the Foundation's public intake center on Thursday morning, standing in line with single mothers, veterans, and seniors, clutching her ticket number like everyone else. Reese told me they were downstairs. "Do you want me to turn them away?" I watched the rain streak down the window. No. That afternoon, Nathan called me. "You did the right thing." "Is it finally over?" I asked. "Not yet," Nathan said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Tomorrow is the ribbon cutting for second home. It's your victory lap, and I have a surprise for you." "What surprise?" "Check the guest list." I opened the online guest list for the grand opening. The governor would be there, the mayor, tech executives, community leaders, reporters from every major outlet. And at the bottom of the VIP section, Nathan had added, "Graham and Madison." "Why?" I asked, my voice tight. "Because," Nathan said, "they need to see what you've built. They need to witness who the woman they betrayed has become. It's the final lesson." The Bay Area sky shone a bright steel blue on the day second home opened. The building rose like a promise fulfilled, 4 floors of glass and redwood, designed to feel like sanctuary rather than institution. The central courtyard was crowded with children playing on new equipment, while their parents sat on benches watching, some crying with relief at finally having stable housing. 3,000 people filled the square. The media presence was enormous. This was being covered as a breakthrough model for ending homelessness, and politicians wanted their names attached to the success. I stood backstage in a simple black suit, my heart pounding in my chest. This was everything I had worked for, everything Nathan had trained me to do. Nathan squeezed my hand. "You're ready. Go change people's lives." I stepped onto the stage. The crowd's roar hit me like a wall of sound. I looked out over the sea of faces, the cameras, the building behind me that represented hope made real. And there they were, standing at the back now that they no longer belonged in VIP seating. Graham wearing the old coat I had given him 7 years ago. Madison looking smaller and less sure of herself than ever. They looked like strangers. I took a breath. The microphone felt heavy in my hand. "5 years ago," I began, my voice echoing across the square through the speakers, "I was thrown out of the only home I had ever known. I stood on a street corner with a suitcase and nowhere to go." The crowd went silent. I saw a mother press a hand over her mouth. "But I learned something else on that cold park bench," I continued. "I learned that even when we have nothing left, we can still be kind." I turned and pointed to the building behind me, its windows reflecting the cloudy sky. This is second home. 200 families will never have to sleep in their cars again because their landlord raised the rent. Children will never again do homework by flashlight in a parking lot. And every person who walks through those doors will hear the words I once needed so badly on Christmas Eve 5 years ago. I leaned into the microphone, looking straight at the front row where Nathan sat. You are not garbage. You are not worthless. You are not alone. You are home. The applause started slowly, then rose like thunder. People stood, clapping and cheering, and I felt the validation for every hard choice I had made over the past 5 years. I stepped off the stage as the governor came up to cut the ribbon. I walked down the steps, weaving through the dispersing crowd, toward Nathan. Graham stepped forward. Charlotte, I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I didn't speed up. I simply kept walking at the same steady pace. Nathan stood, watching me, his hand extended, just like that Christmas night 5 years ago. He took my hand, and we stepped into the building. The massive redwood doors of Second Home opened automatically as we approached. Warm, golden light spilled onto the concrete plaza, and I smelled cedar, fresh paint, and comfort. We crossed the threshold. The doors closed softly behind me, final and complete. Inside, a little boy in a Spider-Man jacket tugged on my sleeve. He looked up at me with wide brown eyes full of wonder. Are you the one who built this place? He asked. I knelt so we were eye to eye. I thought of the girl on that bench. I thought of Nathan and his test. I thought of the coat, of the choice, and everything that followed. I'm one of the people who built it, I said with a smile. A lot of us worked together. He held out a dandelion, probably plucked from a crack in the sidewalk outside. For you? He said solemnly. Because you gave us a home? I took the flower, a weed, really, something most people would overlook. But to me, in that moment, it was more precious than all the wealth I had lost. Thank you, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. That means a lot to me. Outside, the celebration continued. Graham and Madison faced the consequences of their choices and values. But inside Second Home, with Nathan holding my hand, surrounded by families finally getting a real second chance at stability and dignity, I felt something I had been searching for my entire life. I felt like I was home.